How we doing there, boys and girls? Manthieus here. Welcome back to another video. So I guess due to the shortcoming of videos on the channel, it's probably no surprise to anybody that I'm not really playing a huge amount of World of Warcraft at the moment. Certainly am I not sort of dedicating huge amounts of time to my more generalized overall goal of just making lots of gold in the game. And I wanted to put a bit of an overview today of my thoughts on Dragonflight. At least at this point. We've just had patch 10.2.5. We are waiting to see what is coming. There is some sort of secret 10.2.6 with a big skull and crossbones. Time will tell what that ends up being, but I tend to feel that from a gameplay perspective, Dragonflight is really wrapping up now. We have probably seen most of anything that is new or interesting that is going to come within the Dragonflight expansion, and I tend to think we're going to be leaning more towards On the War Within. We're going to get the alpha pretty soon, we'll get the beta shortly after that, and of course the hype train for the new expansion will continue from there. So it may technically be a little early to do a Dragonflight sort of gold making overview, but I've been putting some thoughts together, and I actually started this from replying to a thread over on Reddit, and I realized I was putting so much detail into this that maybe I collate it and into one place and bring it to you guys as well to get some thoughts on this. So I will leave a link to this in the description down below. But what we have here is just a very simple Dragonflight goal making, good or bad. This kind of discussion gets thrown around all the time, and people are really sort of intrigued by, people have fond and very strong opinions in one way or the other. And it tends to be quite easy for us to go, something good or something bad and point a finger at the reason why something is good or why something is bad. And I tend to think it's a little bit more complex than that. There are some plus points and there are definitely some negative points. So I was like, right, well, let's list them out. I started to list them all out and start to give my quick overview of what I thought for each one. And so I want to bring it to you guys today and see what your opinion is on this. Let's start at the top then. Crafting profession, the profession stats specifically. I've tried to break this down quite in much detail. The crafting profession stats, overall, I think we're pretty good. I think the addition of multi-craft, the addition of resourcefulness, inspiration, crafting speed, finesse, there's a bunch of them. You all know what they are by this point. I think generally speaking, the profession stats were good implementation, a good addition to crafting generally. It adds that sort of extra level of something else to figure out. Crafting has been very, very stable for a long time in terms of you take, 2 herbs and 1 vial and you get 1 potion. The formula's been very, very rigid for a long, long time, and these stats came along and they mixed it up a little bit. We felt things like this before. If you played in BFA, you'd have found things like the Silas proc for alchemy gave a bit of a twist to it. You'd be more efficient during a Silas proc, this sort of thing. Now we've got it just freely available for us to play with. That said though, inspiration, complete and utter mess. I've talked about this a little bit previously, and I talk about this quite a lot on the stream actually, but inspiration is just busted. Inspiration needs to either be ripped out completely or heavily tuned before we go into the next expansion. If inspiration stays the way that it is today, it causes problems. The reason inspiration causes problems is because it's too heavily weighted. You can rely on inspiration instead of having to do the things that you're meant to do. You remember that artisan's metal that you've probably got thousands of in your bags? The reason you've got thousands of it in your bags is because there was never the need for you to use it by its designed method. You were meant to take that artisan's metal and you were meant to make a plus 30 plus 30 skill item to guarantee the craft of something at higher quality. But people circumvented that because they just stacked their inspiration to 30-40% and just recrafted it 2 or 3 times. And it meant that they didn't need to use anywhere near as much artisan's metal and could practically repeat that process as many times as they wanted during a week. Inspiration being so powerful kind of nuked a lot of what the new crafting system had to offer. So yeah, if they get inspiration right, it'll be a definitely a big advantage, but I think mostly good with the profession stats, my take at least anyway. Spec trees, let's move on to spec trees. My initial line with these were, I think they were a great thought, but just badly implemented. Spec trees, you've got to start somewhere, and Blizzard clearly had a lot on their hands to make multiple spec trees for all of the different professions. That was no mean feat to actually get them to all work. There was lots of stages during the PTR and the beta for Dragonflight where some of the nodes, you could put points in them and they didn't do anything. It was probably quite a lot of hard work for Blizzard to actually implement all of the nodes and make sure that they all actually did what the node said they were going to do. But the problem is I think they needed to do much more than what they ultimately did. The spec trees were really good. Really, really good in the first few weeks. Yet the problem is that once people started to stack up their knowledge points, the actual specialization of the spec trees became less effective. They kind of nerfed themselves, and we're in a weird position right now where you as a crafter are competing against every other crafter who all have full spec trees already, and the prices of items or crafted items are dictated by those players that have full spec trees. So it means those who have heavily specialized are competing with each other, and nobody's really a specialist. And on top of that, the worst scenario from that is that they are pushing away all of the other people who have yet to max out their spec trees. It was a really good for like patch 10.0, but something should have changed in patch 10.1. Something should have changed in patch 10.2 to alleviate this kind of weird scenario where eventually people fill them and just forget about them. So yeah, maybe if they do continue to use these spec trees in the crafting professions in the next expansion, some additional thought on top is definitely needed. Knowledge points then. Knowledge points is bad. There's no denying knowledge points is bad. I've categorized knowledge points separately to the spec trees because I'm focusing more on how you acquire knowledge points and how they interact with crafting generally. Yeah, they blew. They were just knowledge points. There's no denying it. Like, they're just terrible. I was doing some testing recently, trying to sort of optimize some of my profession leveling guides, and you could get between 100 and 130 like one-time knowledge points quite quickly, quite easily, a few simple rep grinds. But that doesn't really make all that much difference when there was often 500, 600, 700, in case of blacksmithing, 800 knowledge points that you needed to fill those spec trees. And the way you got them, that you were drip fed these knowledge points, 12 to 15 per week, by doing some very, mundane, repetitive weekly tasks. Go kill this mob and it might drop this thing for you. Go farm some dirt for 20 minutes until you get your 2 points from there. The repetitiveness and the time-gated aspect of it is probably what makes it the worst for me. Time-gating them, giving you so small amounts, was problematic long-term. I think they should probably doubled, if not tripled, the amount you could get per week to actually make the process of it much faster to achieve. And dare I say, there probably, at least by this point in the expansion, should be some way for you to catch up on them. The fact that they've not implemented any form of catch-up for these knowledge points is criminal by this point in the expansion, especially based upon what I said a minute ago about the spec trees, that there's actually not that much of an advantage to having your trees fully maxed out now, because you're still competing with other people that have got those spec trees fully maxed out. So why not just give everybody the ability to catch up and grind their knowledge points out quickly and effectively if needs be? Maybe that will come before the end of the expansion, but I'm not holding my breath. But generally speaking, knowledge points was a boo for me. If they want to do something like that going forward, they really need to put some more thought into exactly how, or to pad out the system. It felt like it was missing things. It felt like there should have been more ways, more systems within the knowledge points on how to get them. It generally overall kind of just felt weird. Moving on to crafting orders. Anybody that watches the live stream will know that anytime somebody mentions work orders, it gets me irate. But I do actually generally overall consider crafting orders to be a positive. They do get a +1. They do get a good. Simply on the premise of that, well, being able to put in a custom order for an item exactly how you require it. Great, fantastic. It ultimately means that Blizzard can be more creative with crafted gear. We saw missives turn up in Shadowlands to allow us to sort of determine secondary stats, and that built into embellishments for Dragonflight, and I think that is good, and it requires some way for you to actually say, this is the item I want. These are the secondaries I want on it. This is the embellishment I want on it. So I do believe, generally speaking, the crafting order system is a positive. That is not to say there is not a lot of room for refinement in that, and we'll probably talk about a little bit more of this in a minute. That leads me to, I guess you could sort of call it part of crafting orders, but Blizzard's decision to make everything bind on pickup. This is one that's some people have very strong opinions against. I agree that having mythic level crafted BOEs is probably a bad thing. But I do not agree that the way to minimize that is to just make everything bind on pickup. You could quite easily have some base level items that you can craft and you can list on the auction house as a crafter. It makes it easy to get those if you're looking to buy one of those pieces. Let's say, for example, you could buy your base elemental lariat off the auction house. A crafter's already made it, they've listed it, you're happy with the price, you can buy it. If you want to customize it, then you use a crafting order and you find your crafter and you get it customized. Choice is usually good. Making everything bind on pickup, I feel, was an engagement play by Blizzard. I made the example in my Reddit thread here. Think of islands. Islands were the most optimal way to grind your what was it called? Azeroth necklace. That was the most optimal way to grind your necklace. So people ran islands every single day as it was the most optimal. Putting the legendary dust, I can't remember the names of them. They had multiple names over the expansion. Putting Lego dust in Torghast, though, was an engagement play. How do we make sure everybody goes and does some Torghast runs, regardless of whether they actually want to or not? Well, we'll tie some very strong player power to it. I think making everything bind on pickup in Dragonflight was the same sort of theory. How do we make it so that everybody engages with this new crafting order system? Well, we'll put their best in slot crafted pieces and we'll make it so that you can only get them because they're bind on pickup if you go through this gauntlet of crafting orders that we have newly implemented. I think it was an engagement play. I don't think there's any reason for 40% of most crafted items being bind on pickup now. It's too much. Allow for regular trade of these items more freely and you'll actually have a better economy. So unfortunately, bind on pickup everything, bad. Trade chat spam. Those of you that have watched a reasonable amount of my content over the expansion will know that I heavily dislike the use of trade chat as the optimal way to craft and sell gear or to find somebody to craft and sell gear. Trade chat should be for that odd occasional, oh, I've found this piece of transmog, do you want it? Or I'm looking for something. If you go onto a reasonably sized server nowadays, an open/2, it's just a spam fiesta. It's so unorganized. It's just not a good solution. There needs to be something better. There's so many crafted items. There's so many variations of crafted items. There's so many professions. There's so many people wanting different things. They want a piece of gear for PvP. They want a piece of gear to go do their raiding. There needs to be more organization behind this, and just a rolling chat channel is actually about as unorganized as you could possibly get. I put the little tagline here. Think if Amazon was just a chat channel, right? Everybody who wanted to sell something on Amazon.com or anybody that wanted to buy something on Amazon.com all got put in one chat channel, and you just hope that people find each other. No, you need a better system, Blizzard. There's got to be something better than that. Trade chat spam was a 2006 solution to a 2000 problem. It doesn't work in 2024. We need something better. So overall, that is a bad. Are you guys keeping track of the count, by the way? I do an overall count at the end of this, so you'll get the full conclusion. But keep up with the count if you wish. If you agree, of course. If you don't agree with my good or bad categorization, please let me know. Update to the gathering professions. I think this overall was a good thing. Gathering has been the same forever, nearly since vanilla. Gathering has been exactly the same. Admittedly, it's not meant to be something too fancy. It's meant to be a basic thing for you to do. So I understand why gathering has always been pretty mundane, pretty similar. But updating the gathering professions, giving them crafting specs, giving them tools, giving them some new stats, I do think was good for the gathering professions. From the very little amount of farming I actually do, I do believe that the gathering was more enjoyable. You'd have to put a little bit of thought where you put your knowledge points in there, and it would noticeably make a difference, and you could, at least initially, choose how you would perform at gathering. Were you focused on quantity? Were you focused on quality? Or unfortunately, the weird scenario that ended up being that should you focus on none of that and focus on awakened? the weird scenario that your awakened elements were actually the thing that you focused on more so than ever, for many different reasons during the expansion, but you barely cared about picking up the herbs or the ore for the most part. Your pot of gold from gathering would come from selling Awakened Order or Awakened Frost or whatever the case was, which was a weird twist. But I do think generally overall the upgrade to the gathering professions was good, and I would like to see them move forward with this into the next expansion as well. I was a big advocate for making the gathering professions baseline, but this was on the basis of that they were, herbalism and mining and skinning back in the day, before Dragonflight, was so simplistic, I didn't think they really qualified to be their own professions. We're still locked off to having only two professions, and so I think, to take herbalism and mining, and that to take both of your profession slots, it didn't offer enough previously. So I was a big advocate for squishing them all in and making them baseline. If you fly past an ore node, anybody can whack it. My level up from that idea was that maybe if you do choose to take mining or do choose to take herbalism as like a primary profession, you would then unlock the spec trees for them, say, for example, to allow you more efficient at that. Is just, a concept, right? That's a concept on how you could sort of make the gathering professions baseline. I'd also like to see them do something with cloth collection. It seems really weird to me that anybody has always been able to pick up cloth, yet you have to be a specialist to pick up a flower. This has always been reflective in the prices of things as well. Never has cloth ever been more expensive than anything else. Cloth has always been super duper mega cheap, and this has had knock-on effects that tailoring has always been one of the cheapest professions to play with, and also any class that wears cloth, their crafted gear has historically been basically free. Warlocks, mages, priests, you've had it good for a long time. Anytime you needed a tailor to make you a piece of gear, it was probably a fraction of the price compared to your paladin friend next door who was paying top dollar for their plate gear. In a world where we're trying to make things sort of relatively equal and relatively fair, maybe having cloth or fabric gathering as a separate secondary profession, or a gathering profession, should I say, is something that they could move towards in the future. But for Dragonflight specifically, I think update to the gathering professions was good. That said, there is a downside to this, and it's that there was no replacement for basic gathering. by adding spec trees, by adding tools, by adding stats to gathering professions, it kind of made those gathering professions a lot more like crafting professions. In terms of the fact there was a skill gap to them, you had to sort of dedicate weeks of progression to leveling them up. And it meant that it took away that ability for players to just, on an alt, for example, pick up herbalism and mining and go bang out an hour's worth of gathering to make a semi-reasonable amount of gold. It took that sort of, semi-casual, quick and easy to access gold making method. Was never going to make you millions, but if you needed a few thousand gold quickly, you could spend an hour going and doing some herbing mining, and you knew that what you'd get would be worthwhile. Gathering nowadays, unless you have spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks progressing it, you're not going to be getting the same quantity as others. You're not going to be getting the same quality as others. You may have chosen to spec into one of those directions when realistically the gold from gathering is in the Awakened. You might have, there's some repercussions to the updates that gathering had, and so I think that Blizzard needed to do something to fill that hole. I often, with gold making, consider it a journey. I talk about how you should go on your gold making journey. You start by doing something very simple, very rudimentary, very basic. You step up to something a little bit more advanced, and you step up and you up and you up, and eventually you're a mega cross realm, auction house arbitrage master. But there are steps to get there. There's a big void at the moment because you either do some basic dragon riding or you need weeks and weeks and weeks of consistent progression with crafting professions. There's kind of this weird space where there's a big gap, and unfortunately what has fallen into that big gap, and this may be by design, is tokens. Like I said, I don't know if this is by design. This is probably quite a pessimistic outlook on it. But I think by making that big gap in the middle between super basic stuff and goblins doing goblin things is where the token sits, and what is incentivized probably a lot of people this expansion to take their credit card out and buy a token instead of actually spending an extra hour or two playing the game on an alt doing some basic gathering, which I think is a shame. I know Blizzard's a business, they want to make money, but it's a little bit manipulative from my perspective, and I think they could have done more to fill that void. Talking about materials and gathering, though, one thing that's gone a little bit under the radar for a lot of people, but there's no floor price on materials. And I think this is pretty terrible. What do I mean by floor price on materials? Well, you may have noticed from past expansions, materials would get to a certain point, and then they'd kind of hover at a certain price point. And what that ultimately led to was people would buy up a bunch of the materials at around that price floor, and they would have some use for them. There'd be a way for players to process that sort of oversupply of basic materials and do something with it to kind of flush it out the economy. But there's no floor price for materials in Dragonflight, meaning they just get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and they stack up and up and up and up and up. And as the expansion's gone on, they've had less and less value. Now, previously, people would vendor shuffle, right? They'd buy those really cheap materials, they'd craft some very, very basic items, and then they'd just sell them straight to a vendor. And they could turn a very small profit by sort of doing that process. You might not be making more than a few thousand gold an hour, but it didn't require much engagement from you, and people would do it on a second screen whilst they're working from home, or whatever the scenario was. It was an option at least, and it fulfilled the need to take some of these basic materials out of the economy. There isn't that in Dragonflight, and they've stacked up and they've become practically worthless. Even the most basic of basic crafts start requiring rousing fire or rousing frost or something, which becomes the bottleneck material. And there's just a glut. There's just an oversupply of basic stuff with nowhere for it to go. It's not valuable to pick it up if you're out there gathering. It's not valuable to try and sell it. It's just waste materials, and it's made the sort of the bottom part of the economy for materials really muddy. And I think they need to look at doing something like that previously. Vendor shuffles are not the best solution. You could be more creative with it, but a solution was better than no solution. This obviously is a good time to talk about the buffed expansion for bots. This is not a good thing. It looked like when we were going into Dragonflight that bots were going to have a heavy nerf. It looked like the addition of dragon riding would make it more difficult for bots to do bot things because there was, more human interaction required with even something as simple as flying about the map. There was also new different node types, ones that would stun you, ones that would throw you off in different directions. These are sort of mechanics that were added to gathering to make bots' life more difficult. The problem is they were efficiency, they were nerfs to a bot's efficiency, but that doesn't really matter when you're a bot. This is the problem. Whether you're making 100% efficiency or 80% efficiency, you're still botting and you're still, gathering materials and shit for free, right? This is a problem. It was a nerf, but it wasn't enough to kill them. The reason I think why this expansion was a buff for bots overall, and it is predominantly because of the region-wide auction house, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the region-wide auction house in turn meant that every single bot who wanted to do bot things could hide away on a low population server, have no competition on their shard for when it came to things like gathering materials, but they had all of the advantages that come from the region-wide auction house. They can list their materials and they will sell almost instantly. This means, I think, the efficiency nerf without dragon riding, with the you have to set, these players had to set their bots up a little bit more efficiently. That probably slowed them down, but the reality is the positives far outweighed the negatives. And yeah, it caused a problem, I feel. I think if you look at the quantity of materials and the price of most materials, it's mostly dictated by what bots are doing, which is a shame. They need to fix it. Bots are always a problem. They shouldn't be in the game. If you were caught botting, you should be insta-banned. And I think we all share the same opinion that the quicker that Blizzard does that, the better. But hey, we'll see. Let's talk about the region-wide auction house then. This gets a neutral for me. It's a neutral for me because it's mixed emotions, really mixed emotions. I know that the region-wide auction house for most players is a massive advantage. Little Jimmy on, a low pop server previously was paying or would need to pay twice as much for their consumables, their enchants, anything, their potions, flasks, all of that sort of stuff, because the supply was less, right? Different realms do different things, but there was no need for that. And making the materials and making the commodities region-wide, I think, for the average player was a massive advantage. That said, for goblins, for people who want to use crafting professions to make a bit of gold, it was a massive nerf overall. The price gets pushed down very, very aggressively when everybody is playing in one pot. There's the previous issue that we mentioned, that bots get to do bot things, and one bot farming on one server can have quite a big influence to the price for everybody on every server, which has resulted in it being quite an issue. Prices are absolutely nuked because of the region-wide auction house, but it's a 50-50 in terms of sort of value due to the fact that I know it's a better solution for everybody. Cheaper materials, cheaper consumables. is generally better for everybody. It's just not so good for people who are actually trying to make some gold by crafting and selling, unfortunately. We did, though, see region-wide arbitrage or cross-realm flipping become a thing. It was always a thing, but it had so many stumbling blocks in its place that it made it not really a thing for many players previously. It's far more widely adoptable now. You can, if you are smart about things, you can look through the prices of items on different servers, find where they are cheap, and if you have a second account, you can now facilitate trading that item off to another realm and selling it somewhere where it's more expensive. This is kind of what I consider now to be the upper echelon of what goblins can do. This is where your goblin millionaires become goblin billionaires. But I do think it's a short-lived adventure. Mostly because I believe that Blizzard has the plan eventually. I don't even know if we'll get this in the War Within by the way things are looking, but I do think they have the eventual plan to make everything region-wide, because it's clearly, as we said previously, in terms of materials and commodities, a big advantage. And the only reason we haven't gone region-wide for everything yet is because Blizzard needs to redesign the auction house to make things like searchability better before they can make gear and mounts and everything region-wide. But we'll see how that, plays out in the future. But the fact that it is now a thing for more players, I think, is definitely a positive. Now on to the last couple of things that are impactful, but not sort of directly obvious. We have the removing of callings. Callings was a very, very clever little way to get people a small amount of gold, but quickly, but in a way that didn't scale fantastically well. It wasn't, I'd stated here, callings was not my favorite gameplay loop, but if you just needed 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 gold quickly to buy some potions or flasks or something for your evening's Mythic Plus or raid, you could log on to your character and you could stack up to 3 days worth of callings, and you could quickly, 20 minutes, half an hour, bang out some world quests, and you'd have some materials to sell, you'd have some raw gold that you had made, and it was job done, right? It was quick and easy, no problem. Dragon races kind of came along and tried to sort of replicate that. You get 500 gold for every dragon race you do, and there's usually plenty of them on your map. But dragon races, I tend to think, is incredibly repetitive. And yeah, I just think they needed to boost that initial efficiency, and callings were a good way of doing that. So having those removed completely, I think generally was a negative. And that also leads me, because I'm quite aware this video is now a lot longer than I expected it to be, but if you go in detail, sometimes that happens. Removing of the mission tables. The mission tables being removed was obviously going to happen. This was the problem, right? The mission tables became something that was way too cheesed. Massively cheesed. You could practically have an add-on do it for you, and so that's exactly what people did. It's, no foul on those that utilized the mission tables in any way, shape or form. I know some people had 40, 50, 60, 100 characters up and running with their mission tables, and they just cycle through those characters once or twice a day, and they were printing gold at that point. So they were clearly going to be removed. But my issue with that is it's one of those small things that was never ultimately going to make people millionaires, but was a quick, efficient way to get a bit of gold. I liked with mission tables that they were front-loaded. By front-loaded, I mean you had to put in quite a bit of effort to get them set up, and you didn't make anything from that initial setup. That setup itself wasn't profitable, but then a week or two down the line after it being set up, and it was just a 2 minute a day bang it out situation, they started to pay for themselves, and they then started to turn you a little bit of profit. And so hence why some people decided to do it on 10, 20, 50 characters. but the front loading of that effort made it, you know, players were playing the game, they were enjoying doing what they were doing, they were experiencing a few different things. You had to farm some anima a little bit, so you had incentive to go out and do some stuff. You had to go collect some followers, so you had an incentive to go out to Torghast and do some stuff. You were incentivized to play the game to set that table up. And then even if you moved on to another character, your effort that you'd made previously, you would still sort of, you know, pay for itself slowly but surely. Removing mission tables was unfortunately a bit of a negative for me. So that realistically, boys and girls, and I know this video is now over half an hour long, so I apologize for it being quite so long. But if you have made it to this point, I hope you'll see that, you know, some positives and some negatives go to dictate my overall feel of Dragonflight. Now, for those who had been keeping track with the score, the final score is actually -4. So realistically, if I was to, you know, my conclusion probably is that overall, Dragonflight Goldmaking, probably not a great success. But there were definitely some strong positives in there that if Blizzard can take and move forward, and I think it's not going to take much to fix a few of those -1s and turn them into +1s, they could end up with a really, really solid system on their hands for the next expansion. So here's to hoping we get in the alpha. Here's to hoping that we can get to have a little bit of a look at what's going on nice and quickly as soon as the new content comes our way. Let's hope we can get some feedback in as quickly as we can so that we can sort of hopefully mold the gold making aspect of the game in a direction that is fruitful for everybody. That's my overall goal anyway. So I'll leave it there, boys and girls. Please, I've spoke about an awful lot in this video. I'm sure you've got comments. Leave them down below. Alternatively, this thread is posted in the WoW Economy subreddit, so I'll leave a link to that down below as well. Feel free to go check that out and leave your thoughts over there. But yeah, I've been Manthieus, boys and girls. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing if you're new around here, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.